All right, today we are going way, way back, over 7,000 years to ancient Mesopotamia. We're heading to the cradle of what many consider the world's very first civilization, the Sumerians. Now, their knowledge and their technology were so incredibly advanced for their time that they've left us with one of history's most fascinating mysteries. How on earth did they do so much so early?
And that really gets to the heart of our question for this explainer. You see, the Sumerians basically wrote the instruction manual for civilization. But if they were the first, who taught them? Where did all this incredible knowledge just suddenly come from? This single question is our starting point for a really fascinating journey into their world.
To really get a sense of just how important they were, you have to look at this timeline. We often think of ancient Egypt or Greece when we talk about antiquity, right? But look at that. The Sumerians were around more than 1,000 years before the first Egyptian pharaohs. They weren't just a little bit early, they were the absolute pioneers, laying down the blueprint for all the great civilizations that would come after them.
So, their story begins in what was called the Fertile Crescent, right there between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And it's here that humanity took this massive, revolutionary leap forward. I mean, the Sumerians didn't just create a culture, they engineered the blueprint for society with pieces that, and this is the crazy part, we are still using today.
Okay, so what exactly was in this blueprint? Let's dig into the specific inventions and big ideas that didn't just change the ancient world, but actually laid the groundwork for our own.
I mean, the sheer scope of what they came up with is just astounding. Look at this list. It wasn't just one or two breakthroughs. We're talking about the absolute pillars of society, the wheel, large-scale agriculture, and the very idea of a city, like Uruk, which was home to tens of thousands of people. They gave us written laws, complex math, astronomy, and even how we structure our day. The amount of pure genius concentrated in this one culture is, well, it's truly remarkable.
You know, maybe their most important gift of all was writing itself. Cuneiform, it started out as a pretty practical tool, for keeping records, a little wedge-shaped mark on a clay tablet to mean a bushel of grain. But from that simple beginning, it grew into the sophisticated system that could record complex laws, history, and even the world's first great piece of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. For the very first time, humanity could write down its knowledge and its stories for good.
And right alongside writing, they developed this revolutionary way of counting, the sexagesimal system, or base 60. Now, the genius of using base 60 is how practical it is. The number 60 can be divided by a whole bunch of smaller numbers, which makes complicated calculations for things like trade or tracking the stars or building stuff incredibly efficient. And their math skills went way beyond that, to things like square roots and fractions, a level of sophistication that's still impressive.
And right here, this is where you can see the direct line from their world to ours. That base 60 system, it's the reason our hour has 60 minutes and our minute has 60 seconds. Seriously, every single time you check your watch, you are using a mathematical concept that was dreamed up by the Sumerians thousands of years ago. Their genius is literally woven into the fabric of our daily lives.
So this brings up the fundamental question, right? Where did all this knowledge come from? While modern historians might say it was just a slow, gradual evolution, the Sumerians, well, they had a very different story. According to their own detailed records, all this advanced understanding wasn't something they invented. They said it was a gift.
And this is where we get to the spiritual core of their entire civilization. Because to really understand the Sumerians, you have to explore their relationship with their gods, who they describe not as some distant, abstract beings, but as powerful entities who physically came down from the heavens.
These beings were called the Anunnaki, and the name itself is incredibly descriptive. It translates from Sumerian as those who from heaven to earth came. In their extensive writings, the Sumerians gave credit to the Anunnaki for everything, all their knowledge, all their technology, their entire culture.
In the Sumerian creation story, the Anunnaki created humankind for a very specific reason, to be a workforce. The texts actually describe how they molded the first humans from clay, basically to work the land and serve them, their creators. This set up a relationship that was all about servitude and worship. Their mythology is just vast, all recorded on thousands of these clay tablets that are now in museums all over the world. And as scholars began to translate these ancient texts, they found something pretty startling. Themes and stories that sounded, well, strangely familiar to tales from much later cultures.
One of the most famous examples has to be the Great Flood story. In the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, a hero is warned by a god to build this huge boat to survive a catastrophic, world-ending flood. This story, which was written down more than 1,000 years before the biblical story of Noah's Ark, well, the parallel is just striking.
So what do we do with that? Are these just shared ancient myths that got passed down and adapted over the centuries? Or, as some modern theorists suggest, could they actually be interpretations of real historical events? Could the Anunnaki be something more than just mythological gods?
And here is where we get into a really fascinating area of debate. We're going to look at the physical evidence now, the actual artifacts and texts that are at the center of both mainstream archaeology and some of these more controversial modern theories.
So people who support these alternative theories, they point to artifacts just like these. You have carvings of gods who seem to be wearing something that looks a lot like a modern wristwatch. Many of them are shown holding this mysterious bag, a symbol that, and this is wild, also shows up in ancient Mesoamerican art, a whole world away. Some people even point out how similar it looks to the utility kits that modern astronauts carry. Are these just coincidences, or is it evidence of some kind of shared, forgotten technology?
So how do we interpret this? Well, mainstream archaeology sees these things as symbolic. The wristwatch is a symbol of divine power, the bag is a symbol of royalty, and so on. But the alternative view argues that the Sumerians were just carving what they actually saw, beings using advanced technology. We're presenting both views here for you to think about.
But look, no matter where their incredible knowledge came from, the legacy of the Sumerians is just undeniable. Their civilization did eventually fade away, but its influence became the cornerstone for all the empires that followed, and ultimately for our modern world.
Even though the Sumerian city-states were eventually conquered, their culture was just too powerful to die out. Their conquerors, like the Babylonians and the Assyrians, didn't wipe out Sumerian civilization, they absorbed it. They adopted their writing, their religion, their technology, and in doing so, they made sure it would live on.
And so, the heritage of Sumer is still with us. You can see it in the foundational myths of some of the world's biggest religions, in buildings like the Ziggurat that came before the pyramids, and, of course, in the way we measure time. But maybe most importantly, their greatest legacy is the invention of writing itself, the ability to record, study, and remember our own collective story.
And so we end right back where we began, with a question. Were the Sumerians a brilliantly creative civilization whose real achievements just got mythologized over time? Were they literal historians, recording real events in a symbolic language that we just haven't fully cracked yet? Or is there a deeper, hidden truth about human origins tucked away in those clay tablets? Their legacy isn't just a history lesson, it's a direct challenge to how we understand our past, and maybe even ourselves.